someone that I've been able to go to during breaks and ask questions. And as DDFO, he was always very, very supportive of the CAB. So Jim, I apologize for not saying anything yesterday, but I do very much thank you for everything you've done for me and for the CAB. And we look forward to keep seeing you at the CAB meetings. So with that, I'll kick it back to you, James.
All right. So a few housekeeping items I want to make sure that we take care of this morning before we get started. I'm going to ask everyone to put their phones in, if you have a pager on silent or vibrate. As long as I don't hear it, then we're in good shape. Please make sure that you state your name and your affiliation before making any comments or asking any questions. Also remember, as Greg just pointed out to us, that the microphones are always slightly on, so if they're turned away just like that, you can have those side conversations as long as you do it politely and quietly and do not disturb others. Otherwise, I highly recommend that you keep your comments to yourself because the microphone will pick them up on the minutes and be broadcast around the world. And also in that vein, please make sure that you do speak clearly in the microphone because it gets hard to hear here in the room. I don't know why the inverse of that is accurate, but it is. If you do not speak directly into the microphone, it will not pick you up completely. Everybody did a good job of that yesterday. I do not anticipate any problems today, so thank you all. We have a thorough agenda to get to today. We're going to cover a lot of topics. I'm really excited to hear everything that we have. A lot of things that will help wrap up this 2019 year, set the stage for 2020. Before I call John up, though, is anybody missing a bracelet? We found this yesterday afternoon out in the hallway. Silver bracelet with a line of stones on it. I thought surely somebody... No? Well, if you do recognize it or you want to see it, you think you may know somebody who may have lost one, please feel free to come up. Let me know, take a look at it.
What happens if you just want a bracelet?
I'm going to auction it off at the end of the day.
Okay.
Bidding's going to start around $50. No, we'll hold on to it until we can find the proper owner. We'll hand it over to the hotel if need be. Any questions about the agenda, what we're doing today? Great. One quick announcement I wanted to make. Heather and I tested all the clickers this morning. They all work. Two of them wouldn't light up the little graph. You know, we put the graph at the bottom that shows you which ones have clicked, and there's also a vote counter on the side. Well, two of them wouldn't light up, but the counter still counted their votes. We tested it 6-7 times. It worked the same way every time. I don't know why. So numbers 19 and 20 when we go to vote today. You're not going to see your vote light up down here, but in the clicker counter in the corner, you'll see it increase. And if you want to wait till everybody's done before you vote, please feel free and wait. If you have any questions about that, we can pull things up. We'll make sure that a DOE official sees the vote at the end and see that 19 and 20 did in fact vote. If a couple people need to step out and do absentee ballots at the end, please let me know. We'll find 19 and 20 and just move those out of there so that there aren't any questions at all. Any questions about that? All right, folks. Y'all ready for John Lopez and land use? Let's get started.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Lopez. I'm the Director of Integration and Planning for DOE. As most of you will normally see me present budget information, but today I'm not going to do that. One of my other responsibilities with DOE is doing oversight of the land use planning and screening process here at the site. I got a couple great people from my staff here in the audience, Tanya Tillman, Jack Butler, Kim Rapp. They're really the people that really make this work at the site. So if you got detailed questions on the process, I may defer to them on how we go about doing this. Jack has been doing this for his whole career at DOE, so he's very well versed in real estate and the planning process here at the site. So why am I here today? I'm here to educate the CAB on the Savannah River Site land use and planning and evaluation process. So we get a lot of requests from, not a lot, but we get some requests from outside entities to use federal land at the Savannah River Site. They either want us to transfer the land to them, they want to be able to use the land, they want us to be able to permit, they want to be able to build something on the site. So there's a number of reasons that people come to us and ask us to use federal land. So in 2014, we developed a land use screening plan right here. It's a formal document. And why did we develop this? Because DOE Order 431C requires us to have an integrated land use plan for across all the complexes have this to support DOE missions and to ensure appropriate reuse of land that's no longer needed by the federal government. We're required to establish and maintain a land use management process and plan, which this plan does. All SRS land is owned and controlled by the Department of Energy. And specific uses of SRS land are determined by missions established by DOE, other federal agencies, and Congress. So some of the assumptions, when we put together this plan, what are the guiding assumptions we're going to use before we do any evaluation of any new use of DOE land? The first thing is the current physical boundary under the ownership of the federal government will stay there to perpetuity, except where leased or transferred to a private or public sector entity aligns with DOE objectives. Also, all land use will always be non-residential. We will never allow a subdivision or anything to be built on federal land. Upon completion of the environmental cleanup and nuclear materials missions, long-term environmental monitoring will be released to another program office. So most likely, legacy management, once we are done with our EM mission here, will come to the site and take over the environmental monitoring for the site. All canisters of vitrified high-level waste will be shipped. As most of you know, those canisters are being stored on site, with eventually be shipped to a repository. So right now, whenever we're considering a land use for the site, our assumption is that eventually those canisters will be shipped from the site. NNSA will have an enduring mission forever. That's one of the assumptions that we have. EM is eventually going to go out of business. NNSA will be here forever. Natural resources, which includes forests, watersheds, endangered species, are valued assets and will continue to be actively managed. We have unique ecological habitats, and archaeological sites will be protected and enhanced forever. SRS will continue to set aside specific research sites for the purposes of preserving non-industrial areas for environmental and ecological baseline data. This is really what SREL does for us at the site. They manage those research sites. And then site infrastructure will be right-sized to support site missions. So as the site missions increase or decrease, infrastructure across the site, roads, utilities, will be right-sized to fit those missions. So those are some of the key assumptions that we develop before we start even evaluating a potential new land use for the site. So what are our primary missions at the site? Really, there's 5. EM is one of them, NNSA has 4. EM legacy cleanup. And then NNSA has 4 missions: the tritium, proposed pit production project, surplus plutonium disposition, and non-proliferation program. As you can see from the chart there, the Savannah Riverside is made up of 198,000 acres. Only 7% of that, or 14,000 acres, is used for the primary missions. As most of you know, our nuclear facilities are all located in the center of the site. There's a reason that was done. That if in the event of a radiological release, we have that buffer zone between the middle of the site and the outside area and the site boundary that would help protect the public against any unplanned release from the site. But also, our regulatory documentation, our regulatory authority, our safety basis documents for our nuclear facilities require that we maintain the site perimeter to the site. If we allow other entities to start encroaching on the site, that would impact the safety basis documents that we've developed for operating our nuclear facilities. So right now, that's one of the reasons why our requirement is to maintain the site boundary for the site. Other key activities at the site, and most of you are very aware with what SREL does at the site. It's owned and operated, or it's operated by the University of Georgia. The Savannah River site was the first of 7 national environmental research parks by the Atomic Energy Commission. And across the site, we have 30 tracts of land ranging from 8.5 acres to 7,400 acres where we do, that are set aside areas for this ecological research. And then long-term ecological studies are conducted in these site areas and also serve as a control area for evaluation of potential impacts of SRS operations to other regions of the site. Some other key activities that go on the site, the Forest Service. The Forest Service conducts comprehensive natural resource management program for SRS under an interagency agreement with DOE. This includes wildfire fire suppression, threat of endangered species, invasive species control, habitat management, watershed management, boundary maintenance, management of secondary roads, and timber management and related research. So they play an integral part of maintaining all the secondary roads. Forest Service, a lot of you are familiar with the controlled burns that we do at the site. It's all done by the Forest Service. Military training. Currently, we have an agreement with the South Carolina Military Department to lease out or to use 88,000 acres on the site for training. This is for non-live tactical maneuvers, non-live fire tactical maneuvers, and training activities associated with national defense missions. Then we also have the Three Rivers landfill. The Three Rivers landfill is a 9-county partnership with DOE that operates as a regional landfill for the area. The site uses that, and then the 9 areas around the site also use the Three Rivers landfill. So those are some of the other key activities, non-DOE mission related activities that are currently taking place at the site. So except for the possibility of some limited areas around the site perimeter, unrestricted use of the major portions of the SRS land is not now envisioned. However, some SRS land may be suitable for non-DOE uses. Some of those are the landfill I just talked about. Then we also have cell phone towers. We have a number of cell phone towers on the site, and actually we're constructing 2 more on the site. Those are lease agreements that we have with cell phone companies to be able to construct cell phone towers at the site. Another one that's not listed here is Dave Bender talked last CAB meeting about the solar farm. We're looking at partnering with Dominion Energy to build a solar farm at the site. So that would be another non-DOE mission scope that we would actually do on federal land. The military training exercise, I talked about the 88,000 acres that we use for training, but we also have a permit in place with the South Carolina Military Department to build for 750 acres for them to build a training facility at the Savannah River site. So that's going to help other federal agencies, SRNL, and other military organizations to be able to respond to natural, man-made criminal events involving chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, and non-exclusive explosive materials. So it's going to be a great training facility that is going to be used by multiple entities across the United States in order to do research. Then we also anticipate future interest in both public and private entities in uses of the land. The site was evaluating if any of the tracts of land, so we're currently looking at what land we have available, and is there any of that land that could be used for some of these future entities. So let's talk about the process that we use to evaluate land. First of all, use of all land and water at SRS are coordinated via a site use program. So we have a very formal process at the site where we go through and evaluate when somebody, either within DOE or an outside entity, wants to use our land. The site use evaluation may also include a site selection process to determine the most appropriate location for an activity. So I want to bring something to the site, I want to do mission at the site. This site selection process will look at everything that's being done on site, and it'll make recommendations that we think it'd be good to put that activity here, or we think it'd be good to put it there. So there's a very formal site selection process that's used. We also use a computer-aided design, CAD system, that depicts all the approved site use permits and boundaries. So all the current site use boundaries are loaded into this CAD system. So if I want to do a specific mission somewhere, I already know through this CAD system and this database, that's the system use database, that identifies where all the current missions and site use permits are identified. And so once you've identified a site that you want to do this new mission on, then prior to starting any work on that site, you have to have a site clearance permit that's approved by the site use committee before you can start doing any work on that area of the site that's been identified for you. So we have a number of instruments that we use at the Savannah River site for either transferring land or using land in different from the missions that are established at the site. We have leases. A lease is just a landlord-tenant agreement between two entities. That would be something like when we lease out land to a cell phone company, that would be a lease. Then we have permits. Permits are the same thing as a lease, but it's a lease between two federal agencies. We do that with the FBI. The FBI has a whole wing in SRNL, and so there's a permit that we've established with the FBI that between DOE and the FBI to be able to use that federal piece of property. We also have military training exercises. That's a permit that we have with the South Carolina Military Department that establishes, actually with the Department of Army, that establishes the training area, the 88,000 acres for training at the site. We have cooperative agreements. This is agreement between the United States and the state or local government. SREL is a good example of that. SREL is run by the University of Georgia, so we have a cooperative agreement with SREL, with the University of Georgia, to operate as SREL. We also have the Crackerneck area. That's a wildlife management area. It's close to the Savannah River. There's hiking there. People can get down there and go fishing. That's an agreement that DOE has with the South Carolina Department, DHEC, so that to allow access to that area. And then we actually can transfer land. We did this once at the site. There's an industrial park, I think it's about 7,400 acres in Barnwell, that we actually transferred ownership of the land from the federal government to Barnwell County for the purposes of constructing that industrial park. So here's a chart that shows all the current agreements that we have on site. Some of these I've already talked about. We've got a cooperative agreement with University of Georgia, SREL. Once again, University of Georgia for the conference center off of 278. That's a permit that we have with them. Three Rivers Landfill is another permit, 1,300 acres with the Three Rivers Solid Waste Authority. Crackerneck, which I just talked about, is 10,000 acres with the South Carolina DHEC. We have leases. That's what I talked about with the cell phone towers. So that's the only leases that we have in place, because that's between DOE and a private company. The permit to use the SRNL with FBI. Then we transferred the 2,400 acres to Barnwell County for the industrial park. And then we have the 750 acres that we have a permit with the Department of Army to construct their training facilities on 750 acres. So this is a list of all the agreements that we currently have in place for outside entities, non-DOE related missions to use federal land at the site. So what is the process that we go through when somebody wants to use land at the site? The first thing they typically do is they request, put a request into this Mike Buddy, the site manager. Mr. Buddy, they'll write him a letter, they'll talk to him and say, hey, I want to use this part of the land part of your land to do X, Y, and Z. And then what Mike does is he transfers that request to a land use screening committee. This committee is made up of multiple agents or multiple departments within DOE, okay, that will take that request and will look at, are there any radiological concerns, or any security concerns, are there any safety concerns, or how's it going to fit within the area they want to do this, is there any archaeological programs there? So there's all these different departments within DOE will take that request and do an evaluation of it based on, we have a form that they fill out, and they put all the information in there. There's a bunch of questions in there. They tell us what the planned use of that land is, what they want to do with it, how long they want it for, what kind of use it's going to be. And we look at that form, we look at if there's any environmental impact, and then are there any land use controls that we'll need to have in place in order to grant this request. And if necessary, we also talk to other federal agencies or other agencies. We may talk to EPA, we may talk to DHEC to see if they have any concerns with this new request. So then what we'll do is we'll put together a recommendation to the site manager, and then the decision is either made by the site manager to either approve that through a lease, permit, transfer of ownership, or some other real estate vehicle, or will deny the request. So that's basically the process that we go through. I know I hit a pretty high level here, but it's a very formal process that we've developed at the site, where it's a very thorough analysis that looks at all requests that come in, and then we come up with an overall request to the site manager on whether we should approve or disapprove the request from this outside entity to use the land. Questions?
Any questions around the table for John? Doug, let's start with you.
John, good morning. As always, your presentations always make sense. No pun intended, but I have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
The first one, that CAD system that you talked about, is that a monitoring system that only the folks at SRS are able to view?
Yes.
What land use, what do you all, excuse me, the land use for the hunting, where is that at? And where does that fall up under?
Well, we hunt all across the site. So there's, 7, 8 hunts that they do a year, and we'll break those hunts into sectors. So, so then what we'll do is when we have a hunt plan, we'll cordon off that sector and not allow anybody into that sector, put signs up on roads, on any back roads, main roads, to keep all people out of that area. There's several announcements that are made across the site about a hunt happening in that area. So, and then I believe, I'm not sure, maybe Jack, maybe you know, is there a land use permit that's established for those? Step up to the microphone, Jack.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yes, there's a site use permit process, all the hunts go through a site use permit, and that basically reserves those hunt sectors for that given period of time through the site use permit, and then that also triggers employee notices through the employee communications process. So, and then when the hunt is completed, a notice goes out terminating that site use permit.
Thanks, Jack. Might as well stay at the microphone in case I need you.
Okay, so there's Doug Howard Cap. There's someone that does like a recon of areas to find out what area is going to be more, is going to be better to do that hunt in advance.
Yes, I believe the U.S. Forest Service, though, they keep track of the population of the deer and wildlife on the site, so they'll make recommendations on where they believe the hunt should take place.
Okay. The last question I have is, how much money do you all make through all of these processes that you use for your land use and leasing and whatnot?
Jack, the cell phone companies are probably the only one that we get money from, so I'll let you address that.
That's correct. The only income that the Department of Energy makes is from the commercial cell tower leases, and that's approximately currently, it used to be $10,000 annual income per cell tower. Currently, we only have 3 active cell towers that are operating. We're going to have a new one constructed by Verizon in the coming year, and then probably in the next 2 years, 2 more, another one from Verizon, and then another one by AT&T. And the current income is $12,000 per year. And, but unfortunately, that income does not stay at the site. It goes to the U.S. Treasury.
Thank you very much.
Tom?
Tom French, Cab. Hey, John, nice presentation. I appreciate it. I had one question on your land use planning. At some point, you mentioned you're going to convert or pass the land over to legacy management.
That's correct.
Do they get involved with your planning in advance, or is there just some transition point in the future?
Well, it'll be some point in the future. I mean, right now, that date is so many years in the future, they haven't been involved in that at all. But
Okay.
once we do get closer to the end, they will absolutely be brought in to understand what they're going to inherit from the site. And so, yes, they will be involved in that.
But that's like 2050 or something far out there.
Further than that.
Okay. Thanks.
Dave?
Dave Babagas, Cab. John, thank you again for another very informative presentation. Yeah, that was my follow-up on Tom's question. I think the last time we heard is that provided you get full funding, that the EM mission would be completed in 2065. Is that still?
That's correct.
Okay. And on slide 5, you talk about the primary SRS missions. And EM is the current landlord. And I'm looking at the PBSs that you have, the line item, you have a line item in PBS 42 for land management. And it looks like there's over $9 million in there. Would that all move over to, well, number one, what's in that land management line item? And does that all move over to NNSA if they become the new landlord?
I'm not familiar with the line item for land management. We've got the EOC in 42. Kim, help me here. What am I missing?
Good morning, this is Angela Holmes, DOE, Savannah River. Yes, in PBS 42, there is that line item for the EOC. The other elements of PBS 42 for land management includes various agreements that we have with other folks, like SREL. That funding is under land management. Portions of the Forest Service is under there also.
But it's not a line item, Dan. That's an operations activity. So we have a couple line items under PBS 42. We have the security replacement system and the EOC. Those are capital dollars, but also under PBS 42 is an operations piece of that, and that's what Angela referred to. That's our land management piece. That's, just like you said, the Forest Service, SREL is mainly the biggest contributors to that.
Greg?
Again, the EOC is the Emergency Operations Center.
Correct.
Thank you. Greg Murray, Cab. Thanks, John, for coming down and spending some time talking with us today. Referring also to slide 5, I think it's a really nice slide because it's a reminder to all of us what's going on out at the site and what the missions are and how environmental management fits in with NSA and all that. So I think that's nice. And also, if you look at the following 2 slides, they lay out a little bit more on that in terms of the other key site activities, the research stuff, and the Forest Service military training, landfill, et cetera. So I think those are really good reminder slides. Real quick question, or a couple quick questions. I'm assuming when we start talking about cleanup, that covers the entire site, not just the 7% or 14,000 acres that are identified in the table?
That is correct. Now, the NNSA's missions are all in a separate area. But yes, there's a lot of groundwater and soil, okay, underneath the ground that's also part of that cleanup. So
Right.
when I'm talking 7%, that's just the physical boundary of where the missions are right now, where the buildings are.
Where the buildings are and all that. But we've got streams and all kinds of other fields that are being cleaned up otherwise
That's
all over
correct.
the full 200,000 acres. In terms of the research set-asides, so I guess that's SREL, probably.
That's correct.
Is there any other, well, I guess the other way to say this is, I'm assuming research goes on over the entire site also.
Well, yeah, most of our research happens at SRNL, okay? But yes, for the ecological research, that's all done by SREL in these tracts that have been reserved across the site.
Okay. And then finally, on the, where does the military stuff fit in? Is that in the land buffer areas? Is that in some of the primary mission sections? Where does that go?
It would be in the land buffer areas.
Okay.
So they would never go into where the primary missions are taking place. They may, if they want to do some specific training, like inside C reactor, they may do some specific training in there, but most of the 88,000 acres that's been set aside are all buffer area type
Okay.
zones.
So the deer hunts that we talk about and this other stuff, the natural, the land management, so that's basically everything that's left over once you account for all the mission facilities in essence.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay. Carlos?
Carlos Cato, CAB. John, thanks again for your presentation. I'm just curious, once approval has been recommended, what is the actual determining process for the real property agreement? I noticed you mentioned the 4 types. Like, is that decision solely Mike Budney's, or is there a panel?
Well, the panel makes a recommendation to Mike Budney, but Mike Budney is the final say-so. Now, if there were to be any kind of land transfer, like, if we were going to transfer federal land to another entity, then we would have to go to headquarters for authorization for that. But to authorize, like say, the solar farm on site, that's within the power of Mike Budney to do that.
And is there a formal process that he has in place to make that decision, or is this just kind of a?
Well, that's what our land use planning manual is. It lays out that process. And then we have a formal committee that's, everything's under configuration control that meets. We have a form that we use to fill out. There's meeting notes that take place. We have that form. We have attendance at all those meetings. So all of that is a very structured process. So we know who exactly, and everybody signs off. Each department, let's say the security department, they actually sign off and make a recommendation, yes or no, on whether or not we should move forward with that entity. So it's a very formal process. So when Mike's reviewing the review, he can go through everybody's notes, their recommendation on whether or not they've approved or disapproved moving forward.
So the actual property agreement is considered throughout the process? It's okay.
Yes. Go ahead, Jack.
I'd like to make a clarification, is that when Mr. Budney, he makes the approval at the site level as to whether or not a land use can be approved at the site level, but when it comes down to the actual approval of the real estate instrument, that he does not have approval authority for the real estate instrument itself, such as a real estate permit or a real estate lease. It has to be approved by a DOE certified real estate specialist, realty specialist.
Which Jack is going to be here hopefully within the next couple of months. Right now, we have to defer to the Cincinnati office because they have their certified real estate professional up there. But Jack's in the process, and Tanya, of getting their certification so we can do that here at the site. But he's right, Mr. Budney does not sign that. A certified real estate who has had all the training actually signs off on the real estate instrument.
Thank you.
All right. Narinder?
Thank you, John. Narendra Malik, CAB. I have 3 questions. Who issues the land use permit? Is it DOE or SRNL?
DOE or SRNS. Jack, who's the actual signature on the land use permit?
Well, it's actually a site use permit.
Site use permit.
And it's a land use control process. And it's actually, it's a collective approval by a standing committee of members of DOE with input from subject matter experts from both DOE and various contract personnel who represent subject matter experts for all the key stakeholders on the site. And but the primary representatives are from DOE-SR, and I'm the committee chair for that. And it's more of a coordinating role, not a, and I actually represent John, who is technically the committee chairperson for the land use committee. And so it's a kind of an automated process. Site use request comes in by an organization that wants to, say, for example, put in a new parking area, say in Z area, and in support of the saltstone disposal unit construction project. So it comes in and they need, say, an extra 12,000 square feet of parking for concrete trucks. And so that comes into our site development control office, which is an organization that belongs to SRNS. And they actually run that program for DOE-SR. And they send out, they put together the request. It's an automated process, and then it goes out to all the committee members. And that process, they have 10 days to respond with their input, and whether they approve it with or without comments or with or without restrictions. And then I also vote on it, and or actually concur or non-concur. And then if there are no significant issues, it's approved. If there are some significant issues, then they get resolved amongst the committee members, and then it goes back and gets reviewed again, and then the approval is issued with restrictions, and then those are resolved, and then the project can move forward. So that's pretty much how it works.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. My other question is, when Forest Services harvest timber, who gets the money?
Treasury.
Thank you.
All right.
Answer why?
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but why?
Out of my purview. I don't know if, Jack, you know the answer to that, but I just know the DOE, you can't take, Congress gives an appropriation to DOE, and you can't subsidize that appropriation with other money. So any other money that comes into the site has to go, for non-mission stuff, has to go to the Treasury.
Malcolm.
Malcolm Phillips Cab. On that issue, which isn't my question, that your slide, I think it's 3, that says the all SRS land is owned and controlled by the U.S. Department of Energy. It's really, I think, the federal government owns it, which is the reason it goes to the federal government as opposed to into the DOE coffers. My question revolves around the site boundary. And your SAR, your safety analysis report for the site boundary, has certain assumptions, and it has a site boundary, and it has certain assumptions on radiological controls, you know, the average person would not get da-da-da-da and so forth at the site boundary. As you have more use into that site boundary, do the people coming in have dosimeters or something that are assigned to them? Or is your site boundary simply around the mission area and not the buffer area? Maybe
No,
it's
the
a
site
question.
boundary is around the buffer. You would only get a dosimeter if you're going into the process area within the facility. But, you know, that's why we're maintaining the site boundary in case there was a release, okay, that people from the outside wouldn't get, it would provide that buffer zone so people from the outside would not get contaminated. But we're not issuing dosimeters to every person that comes on site. It's only for people that go into the areas where there's radiological controls.
So for accident control assumptions in your SAR, your safety analysis report, which is super detailed, I assume I haven't seen this one, but I've seen others. Is that modified each time the land use is modified?
Well, we haven't really been modifying the land use by letting people come into the site boundary. So if we would do that, we would evaluate the impact on our safety basis documents. So, which is why we're maintaining our site boundaries, because a lot of our safety basis documents refer to that site boundary as the perimeter for the buffer zone.
Malcolm Phillips again. So as an example, the landfill, which is pretty standard or pretty continuous, and workers in the landfill, is your SAR reanalyzed and amended based on things like that are more permanent versus just an incidental use?
Maxine, you want to answer that?
Sure. Excuse me, Director. Maxine Maxted, DOE. Excuse me. So any of the activities where an individual comes on site, even through the land use, they go through training that our normal workers go through. So our safety bases aren't changed at the boundary. Our boundary stays the same. There's exact mileage that's put into each of the DSAs for each of the facilities. So that doesn't change. We do train anybody that comes on site that's going to be within that boundary. So they're not considered off-site individuals at that time.
And Malcolm Phillips again, and records are kept of those individuals?
Yes, sir, you have to have a badge to get on. Or there's some kind of a program where they keep track of who's coming on and going off.
Where's your SAR located? I mean, can anybody take a look at your SAR and just?
We don't have one. Each facility has its own, and now they're called documented safety analysis. That's what you'd be looking for. But each facility has them, and depending on what level of classification this facility has in their SAR or DSA is where it's available or not.
Malcolm Phillips again, is there a combined SAR that considers all the different impacts together? I'm certain there is. There's got to be a combined SAR.
I don't know of a combined SAR. We do have a program where all of the DSAs are reviewed by the same similar individuals, and the risks have to be evaluated for each of the facilities. I don't know of one SAR or DSA for the entire site. Each transportation activity has one. Each facility has one. All of those are accounted for.
Thank you.
All right. Bobby?
Bobby Williams, Cab. Thank you for your presentation, John. Where is the solar farm going to be constructed, and where is the military facility going to be constructed?
Both of those,
Location.
right now, we're looking at both of those facilities being in A area. So the area we're looking for that we've cited for the solar farm is very close to SRNL. It's inside the gate in A area. So there's some land there that's not being used. And it's close to a transmission line, and it's also close to SREL if they want to do further research on batteries. I think they talked about that last time. It puts it in close proximity to that. The 750 acres, that's also in A area. You'll be able to access that off of D area, right?
Yeah, I can. The 750 acres is actually split into two parcels. The larger parcel is about 470 acres or so, and that's in B area near the Cloverleaf. And then the remaining 280 acres plus or minus is down at Gun Site 51, which is near L Lake. just off of Highway 125. And access to both both areas or parcels will be off of Highway 125, so they will not have to come on site through the barricade. They'll have their own separate entrance off of Highway 125, and they will actually they'll be managed similar to the way the landfill is, as far as badging and access and that sort of thing.
So you're constructing 2 facilities for the military?
Yes, the Gun Site 51 parcel will be more austere. It's going to be more of a forward operating base. And then the cantonment area, which will have a headquarters, maintenance facilities, training facilities, a small barracks for small units that might want to stay overnight during training, classroom type training. That's going to be the B area facility.
Okay. And what's the acreage for the solar farm? How many acres?
That's going to be somewhere around 70 acres. It will definitely be it will be, it should not be more than 100 acres. It's going to be around 70 to 80 acres.
I do need to, Thomas Johnson, DOE, I do need to respond to one thing, Ms. Bobby. You made a statement on, would we be constructing?
Thomas, can I get
I
you
want
to-
to clarify, let's try this again. Get really in here. I want to clarify that DOE is not, when it comes to the military, DOE is not doing the construction work in those areas. The construction will be handled by the military, not by DOE or by any of our contractors.
Okay.
Yes, and all the construction will be funded by the National Guard and Department of the Army.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we have about 10 minutes left and 5 cards up, so let's see if we can hammer through this, all right? We'll do Charles, Jim, AK, Candace, and Betty. Let's get through it pretty quick.
Charles Hilton, Cab. John, thank you again for the presentation. This may be outside your bailiwick. Three Rivers landfill has 1,400 acres, and I'm not sure, what's the life expectancy of that landfill? That was a lifesaver for Aiken County. We used the Kaland mines for years until they ran out. Is there additional lands being reserved to expand that, or do we have a 100-year life on that, or do we know?
I'll defer to my expert. Jack, do you know?
The permit was, term of the permit was for 50 years, and I think that was written somewhere about 1996, plus or minus. And I don't know of any plans for additional land that was reserved for it. Thomas, do you know any more?
Yes, a couple things more. When the landfill was originally constructed, and Jack is correct, it was for a 50-year life expectancy. Now, they did an analysis maybe about 5 years or so ago, and because of some of the practices that have come into play with the recycling and other things, they still, even after about 20 years of operation of the landfill, they were projecting that they still had on the order of about 50 years worth of space left at the facility. But there are no other lands that were planned for the landfill.
Jim?
Jim Gill, Cap. John, thank you again for a very informative presentation. A question for you. The permitted or planned uses for the land exclude residential, rather specifically in your presentation. Is that because of the construction materials, et cetera, that would occur if residential were permitted within the site, or is that an issue relating to the radiological long-term exposure?
I'm sure it's due because of the nature of the site and the radiological exposure that took place at the site. Now, I know I left Fernald And I know Rocky, Mound Plant, they all have non-residential restrictions at those sites as well. So those have all been turned over to legacy management, and you can never do anything residential on any of those sites there. So I don't know if it's because of liability reasons, or I'm not quite sure the exact reason why that is, but probably because of the nature of what we did at this site, it would always be non-residential.
Okay, thank you.
AK?
AK Hassan Cab. It seems that the decision by the committee, excuse me, is being made on, as far as allowing permits, transfers, et cetera, is being based largely on value-added type of concepts, because income generation is obviously doesn't play that much of a part in it, since we only have leases, for satellites or whatever, for not satellites, but is that satellite? But anyway, for the companies, is that satellites? Is that what it is? Satellite company? Okay.
Cell towers.
Okay, but anyway, my point being, is the thinking of the committee more restricted to areas that have already been developed in terms of roads, bridges, et cetera? And if not, then who takes on that responsibility, that financial responsibility, in order for them to have access and what have you?
Well, the federal government, with DOE, would never expand roads, bridges, infrastructure to support a non-DOE mission. Okay, so like the South Carolina National Guard wants to come in and build their facilities. Any infrastructure they need to build those facilities will be paid for using Department of Army or South Carolina National Guard dollars to do that infrastructure. So DOE would never pay for that. And we don't have remember, access to the site is limited, so we wouldn't have we have cell towers that has very limited need to access. So you wouldn't want to put another commercial entity on site, because we're just not going to let anybody come in and out of the site for another commercial entity. We benefit from the cell phone tower, so we allow that on site. But that's really the only reason why we have a lease with the cell phone companies.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Candace?
Candace Cave Cab. Relating to the site use permit, if a site use permit is denied, is there a formal appeal process to that?
Jack?
That's that's kind of a situational question. The majority, as a matter of fact, almost all of site use permits are internal to DOE, and they're mission related. It depends on the reason for the denial, and most of the time it would be because either it would be interfering with a previously existing site use permit that reserved a piece of land for another facility, and they just couldn't coexist, or primarily because of environmental restrictions, such as building in a wetland area. If an organization such as, and I'm not picking on SRR, but say SRR wanted to put a facility in a wetland area, and it was denied. Normally, their workarounds, they would have to maybe offset their facility or move it. It's just like any project that you would encounter on any government facility. I worked for the Corps of Engineers prior to coming to DOE, and when you're trying to site a facility or a structure, you would, in order to meet NEPA requirements, if you were going to impact a wetland, you would relocate that or offset it or move it so that you would avoid that impact to the wetland. So normally, those types of impacts, there wouldn't need to really be an appeal process. You would work together with the site planners and try to avoid impacting the restriction that would have resulted in a denial on the site use permit. So normally, I don't think I've encountered, maybe in the 10 years I've been here, one or two cases where a permit's been just flat out denied.
We've also, this is Thomas Johnson, DOE. We've also had instances where the requesting entity for the particular piece of property, it was not, there was no public benefit associated with the particular request. It may have been, or I've seen cases where it has been just for a commercial or a localized interest only, and in those cases we have denied the request from the entity. And your question was whether they had any appeal rights or not. They can make a request for another review, but it's still at the site level. Basically, when it gets denied by the site manager, there's not too much of an opportunity for them to come back for another round of review or approval.
There's always an appeal process, by the way, formally, and so there is an appeal process, be it either through the agency, an arbitrary and capricious statements, if the agency does that, through the courts. So there is an appeal process. Whether it's used or not is a different story.
Well, I beg to differ with you. If you are a private entity and you're requesting use of property on Savannah River and that request is denied, you can appeal to your congressman or whomever, but the answer is in all probability going to be the same. When we deny a request, there is going to be a sound basis for why that request was denied.
Malcolm Phillips, I understand that, but whenever an agency makes final agency action, there's always an appeal process to the courts. That's just the way the system works, and I'll get you that citation later.
Betty, let's hit you and wrap this up.
Betty Cook Cab, thank you. It was a really interesting presentation, and I think you answered my question as far as the money that goes back in. But in the situation of the solar fields, could that not help our electrical, like it produces electricity? Could that not be put back into the site to reduce our electricity, or it would still have to go into the government as far as income?
That's the only reason why we're doing the solar fields, because it will be a benefit to the site. It's going to result, if we negotiate rates with, was SC&G, now Dominion, for providing electricity to the site. So it will absolutely benefit the site, which will result in a lower rate for electricity for the site, yes.
Thank you. That was my question.
All right. Thank you, John. So up next we have remop, and while Megan comes up, I want to remind everybody to please try to limit yourself to 2 questions at a time. Write down as many as you want. We'll go around the room, we'll get everybody heard. Maybe somebody else has the same question as you do. After we go around, if you still have more questions, keep your card up. We'll do too. But please try to limit yourself to 2 questions at a time, if you would please. No button is forward, backwards.
Good morning, everybody. I know a lot of you have seen my face a few times now. I'm the project coordinator for REMOP, which is the Radiological Education Monitoring and Outreach Project that the University of Georgia Savannah River Ecology Lab that we run through our outreach program. This project was funded probably back in 2016, and we were able to start in 2017. This project has, we've learned a lot from it, and this talk is to share some of what we've learned with you all. So at the beginning, I'm going to give a summary and background of how the project got started, why it got started, and what we've done from 2017 up until now. So I'm going to break it down by year, and then at the end give sort of a highlight reel of what we learned and our summary projects. So REMOP, like I said, is an outreach project focused on radiological environmental monitoring programs, and specifically educating the community in Burke County, Georgia. The key components were to collect some data with individuals within the community as an education tool to help them understand the multiple environmental monitoring programs that are performed in and around the Savannah River site and Plant Vogel. So this is Burke County, Georgia, in the yellow outline. It's the largest county in the state, and the 2010 census says there's about 23,000 residents in the state, in the county. There is a big community very involved in local issues, and they raised concerns actually to the CAB about the environment that they were living in and being able to understand the environmental monitoring programs that were released at the time. So back in 2016, the EPA performed a technical assistance needs assessment, and I'm going to get into what that is in a couple slides. Burke County is sort of unique in this area because it houses Southern Company, Georgia Power's Plant Vogel, which is expanding. They added, reactors 3 and 4. And it's directly across the Savannah River from the Savannah River site. So under here I have radiological environmental monitoring. SRS monitors multiple pathways in the county, including air and food sources and groundwater. Plant Vogel, almost all of their environmental monitoring is in Burke County, and they monitor all of the pathways. DHEC samples in the Savannah River, and there are multiple communities in Burke County that consume fish out of the Savannah River, so that is still a relevant sampling source and data source. And then the Georgia Department of Environmental Protection, the EPD, they monitored in the county up until 2004. So historically, there were 4 monitoring programs that touched near Burke County or in Burke County, and now there are currently 3 environmental monitoring programs. So there's lots of data. The technical assistance needs assessment that the EPA performed, this is something that the EPA does in lots of communities all across the country. They bring in experts, they interview people from the community, they interview stakeholders, and they create a report that sort of lists a bunch of needs the community wants. And they don't just go in and say, we're focusing on a project about radiological contaminants, what does the community need? They answer the question, what does this community need? And you come up with a report. And so in this report, there are suggestions about education and environmental monitoring programs, but then there are also recommendations about jobs and growth in the community in general. And this is just a clip of the EPA's website. So if you Google technical assistance needs assessments, you'll be able to find all the ones they do all across the country, including the one that they did in Burke County. But they really wanted to understand the specific needs of residents in Burke County, and they did facilitate multiple conversations with stakeholders, including from DOE and local community groups and community leaders. And then they shared that report with us, which was really helpful because when I showed up in 2017, basically a layout with lots of recommendations for what would do well in an education program was sort of laid out for me, and I was able to use that as a sounding board. So some of the things they suggested for communications outreach was presentations and using social media and producing a newsletter to send out to groups. They also made sure to recommend that regular community input needed to be a priority in the project. And they suggested topic recommendations, including like Radiation 101 and information about the status of SRS and Plant Vogel. So that was sort of the background information. I showed up in March of 2017, and like I said, was able to hit the ground running. And the first thing we wanted to do was kind of similar to TANA, was listen and learn from the community members. What does Burke County want, and then what can SREL as a unique institution provide the community? And so we started creating content, like I said, based off of some of what we learned from the TANA and what we learned from talking to community groups like Georgia Wand. The first thing I did was I created community talks. The goal of community talks was to, we reserved a room in the library where they host community meetings regularly. And I designed individual curriculum. I call it curriculum because I come from an education background, but there are talks that were meant for people to be able to come to as an individual talk and learn something. But if an individual continued to come to the talks every month, they could build that knowledge into something where they'd be able to read an environmental monitoring report and understand that report. So the first one was just asking, what is the scientific method, which is what our environmental monitoring programs are based off of, right? We ask a question, we go collect data and get an answer. The next talk was about radiation. The next talk was about pathways in the environment that contaminants move through. And so we created these with the idea for people to be able to come and learn and build on knowledge, because you can't, it's a lot to ask somebody to come to one talk and be able to understand a 500-page, extremely dense environmental monitoring report. So we knew that wasn't a good goal for us to have. It had to be long-term knowledge building. I also started a program with the middle school in the county. I worked with 7th graders every 2 to 3 weeks and basically mirrored the curriculum I had designed for the adults, but in the classroom. And one of the benefits of that is in the classroom I could do fun science experiments, and we went outside and I showed them how you sample water and how you sample soil. I was able to subset the data and extremely subset the data because there are thousands of data points, but I subset the data for the students, and the students were able to analyze actual real data scientists collected in the field from their community, and then they were able to draw conclusions about the data that they analyzed, and we made scientific posters, and at the end they presented it at one of our community events. So we got really involved with the 7th graders. We added a page to SREL's UGA site where all of the content I was creating and that we were creating was housed, so that it wouldn't just be you have to come to this thing to get the content. You can access the content from anywhere. I also created some fact sheets and brochures to supplement a lot of the information that was already out there. And we started compiling all of the data. That was a huge portion of this project outside of the education portion, was taking the data that's publicly available from SRS and South Carolina DHEC and Georgia Power through the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and putting it all in one place in one Excel file so that we can show it to the community, to show what South Carolina samples and what SRS samples and what Plant Vogel samples, when they sample the same substrate, so for example soil, if they sample soil and they test for cesium-137, what does that look like? Are we seeing inconsistencies, that sort of thing? And at this point, I have to really thank everybody from those groups, especially at the beginning of the project. I'm sure every time they saw my email in their inbox, they were like, oh no, she's asking for something else, because if I didn't have their support, and I really do say support because I wouldn't have been able to get some of this data. Every time I ran into something happening in a data set, I would call the person who wrote that data, who collected that data, and those folks really showed up for this project, and they didn't have to. So I really appreciate that. And then again, gathering information resources. So when I showed up, I sort of got the feeling that there was no resources, nothing existed. And when I started doing research and figuring out should I talk about first and that sort of stuff, I realized that there were a lot of educational resources for adults. It was just spread out. Some was with the Physics Society, some was with, over here with this society or agency. And the reason I did have to create some supplemental fact sheets and brochures, but the reason I didn't have to do as many is because I was just able to, spend 3 hours, 5 pages deep in Google looking for this thing that exists, and I knew it had to exist. But not everybody has that luxury of time or research skills. So I gathered a lot of those, and those really helped the project move along. So kind of switching gears back to the community talks. This is attendance at community talks in 2017. And it was pretty good, especially the first one in July. That was one talk. But I want to kind of talk about this data a little bit because one thing in the next few slides you'll see that I say is people weren't really showing up. And this sort of looks like it's increasing, but one of the things in conjunction with Georgia One, which is a local group that works in the county, I was holding community talks at different times during the day and at different days of the week. So we were trying to figure out what is the best time for people in the community to show up to one of these talks. So for example, in October, it looks like 25 people came, but what that really is 25 people came to 5 different talks. And so I would hold, on like a Monday, I would reserve the library basically for the whole day, and I would hold the same talk at 8 a.m., at 11 a.m., and 6 p.m. And then that Thursday, I would hold like a 10 a.m. and a 6 p.m. talk as well. And so sometimes multiple people would show up to the multiple time periods thinking it was going to be a different talk. So it was a lot of effort, right? It was a lot of time and effort to hold these different time periods and figure out, trying to figure out what time was best. So the reason I say in a few slides that it seemed like people were declining is because it was like repeat customers. And this October talk was, there was one talk that we held where everybody from South Carolina DHEC, not everybody, but South Carolina DHEC, Georgia Power, and SRNL and DOE folks came over to answer questions in person about the environmental monitoring programs, which was really special, but we only had 2 people from the public show up to ask them questions. Which is good. 2 is more than 0, which is often what I told myself. But yeah, so that sort of explains we're not getting the people that we wanted is the short end of that. So in 2018, this is sort of what I felt like. I was sitting in a room by myself most of the time, wondering what should I be doing? What can I do to get people to come? Because I recognize we're all busy. You know, what is it that's not making people feel like this is a priority to come and learn about something that previously, right, we all got the impression people were worried about. So we decided to change our strategy and go to where the community is. We were going to maintain the community talks, and the way I started thinking about community talks was it was sort of like open office hours. At universities, professors, when they teach classes, they often have a day of the week where they say, I have office hours from 2 to 4 p.m. If you have a question about the material, come talk to me in that time period. And so that is sort of how we still advertise the community talks the same. We still did everything we were doing before, but you know, I showed up and instead of expecting to give an educational talk, I had that prepared, so if somebody showed up and wanted the talk, I would give it. But what often happened is they would come in and ask me questions about the monitoring programs, about this or that, and I would answer them, or if I couldn't answer them, if I didn't know the answer off the top of my head, I would get their contact information, go research it, figure out the answer for them, and email them back. So I started treating it more as office hours that people could stop in, stay for 5 minutes, ask me some questions, and then leave, as opposed to like an hour-long engagement they had to fill in their week. And we wanted to provide additional places for the community to interact with us. So this is, if you look at the y-axis, it's a lot different. This is my community talk attendance for January and February 2018. In January, we only had 2 people. I believe those 2 people were representatives from Georgia Power, so they did live in the Burke County community, but they were very well versed in environmental monitoring programs. But I did continue to hold community talks. Nobody came, so instead of having a bunch of zeros up there, just with these. But what we did is, if you're from the Aiken area, you know SREL has a really successful program called Touch It Animal Day. We host it every August. This past year, we got over 1,000 folks and families that attended, and we showcase our biodiversity, our animals, our plants. We talk about SREL research, Families get to touch animals like you see here. They're touching a diamondback rattlesnake. It's a big draw for the community. So we decided to replicate that in Burke County specifically, but instead of having every booth be animals, we would have a booth of animals and then a booth that talks about the water cycle, and then a booth that talks about contaminant pathways, and a booth that talks about radiation. So down here, it took almost 30 SREL scientists and staff. It took multiple folks from the community to show up and do that, and we had probably 6 families total, but 36 individuals came. They brought their kids, and it was a good 36. It felt like a lot at the time. So we felt like this was a really successful program, Burke County Ecology Day. Our staff in Burke County, Natalie Harrington, and Georgia One staff, Janie Hill, they were amazing. This was, they were the ones that were like, we need something bigger, we need something better to bring more people in. So we built off that, and that's where Burke County Ecology Day came from. So this is just some more information. We held it at a local church in Waynesboro, so a familiar place, a place where community often gathers. We brought our animals, but we also brought, right here is just the table of resources. We had SREL scientists at every booth to answer questions to anybody, and it's just a family-friendly atmosphere. And we felt that that worked a lot better than sort of the community talk where we were expecting people to come to us and have that time out of their day. It's a little bit of a better draw if people can bring their kids, if they can do that kind of stuff. So we did give a few talks and a few programs outside of Burke County. Once I had all of the environmental monitoring program education materials created, I realized that Burke County it wasn't the only group of folks that had questions about what was going on. So I sort of started testing. I gave a couple talks to high school classrooms. I did Adams in the Alley in Aiken, South Carolina. We did a few things to see if this programming would start working in other places. So in total, in 2018, I did about 8 community events, 5 talks, and continued that Burke County Middle School program where I was seeing the same students every few weeks. And we were building on that program. But also in 2018, so I just told you about all the education part of the project that we did, but in 2018 we also started our sampling, the community sampling that is for education purposes only. Our sampling totals are 10 for each matrix, so each substrate sample. That's not a statistically important number. You're not going to learn anything from those 10 samples, but the important part was people in the community who wanted to learn about the process could literally see the process from, taking a pear and then getting the value back on the contaminants in that pear. So we started that at the farmers market and with local landowners. We started working towards establishing the air monitoring station back in Burke County for 1 year. That took a lot of time because you have to get permissions, you have to get it established, and I'll get into that a little bit later. And we partnered with a third-party lab to run all of our rad samples. So within SREL, we ran our 20 metals, but then another group ran all of our rads. And then another part of this project is we wanted to formally understand what people in Burke County knew about environmental monitoring programs. So we designed a survey and wanted to distribute that within the community so that we can learn how to better tailor our education efforts and to just really understand what's going on in the community. So we did that too. These over on your left are what we sampled: air, surface and groundwater, soil, fruit, vegetables, meat, and milk. We did 20 metals at SREL, and then we sent out all of the radiological sampling. So in 2018, we, like I said, started, we collected all 10 of our fruit samples and 3 meat samples, which those 3 samples were wild game. And we collected 20 surveys. So in 2019, we wanted to grow and expand on that. we also kept doing data compilation. We decided that we were going to do data compilation from 2005 to 2015, so a 10-year average from the 4 agencies. Right now, we only have the top 3 data finished. We're still working on the EPD from Georgia. That's a little bit difficult. It's all in PDFs. We're trying to digitize it, figure out if we need to hand enter it. It's a lot. But we do have the 3 current environmental monitoring programs data entered, and that's what you're going to see today. And just to give you an idea of how large these data sets are, for a 5-year period, for SRS only, we have almost 50,000 lines of data. So these are huge, comprehensive data programs, which is really, really great, and we're just trying to get them all in the same place. So this year, what have we done? We did shift focus a little bit. This was going to be the last year of the program, so we wanted to maintain the educational resources that we're working and then focus on the wrapping up of the project. So making sure we get all of our sampling done, making sure that the report is getting finished. We did host Burke County Ecology Day again. Like I said, we wanted to focus on the things that were working. We hosted it this year, however, at Blakeney Elementary School. One thing that we learned is that captive audiences, you always have people show up. You're never going to have to worry about advertising or anything like that. So we, through Natalie Harrington, our community organizer, she knew the administration at Blakeney, and we went to them and said, this is what we can offer, what do you guys want to do? And they're like, yeah, let's do it, let's show up, let's get the whole school involved. And so we had every student and teacher participated at Blakeney, and so for the second Burke County Ecology Day, we went from 36 people attending to over 800 attending. And this is one of our big lessons of all of REMOP, is that you got to go where the people are, because we got to talk to 806 individuals about contaminants and watersheds and pathways and also native wildlife. We sort of brought out, everything for that. And so it was really successful. We also did still do other, we had the resources to talk about environmental monitoring programs. Why not talk about them everywhere we're asked? So we did do that at a few additional places in 2019. And this is a sort of summary. I do want to point out in the totals, I made a mistake and it says 4,500 members of the public. In these numbers, I don't include those outside of Burke County numbers. And this number includes the folks from Augusta Earth Day. So that number is really only about 2,000 folks. I just wanted to make that clear. Why that number jumps up so much from the 2018 number. That was a mistake on my part. But in Burke County alone, we reached about 2,000 people in 2019. And then the additional 2,500 is from Augusta Earth Day. We also finished sampling in 2019 everything but air. Actually, so on the slides, it says we still have a few water samples and 4 soil samples. I finished collecting those yesterday and sent them off yesterday. So we are officially done, except for the air monitoring station, which is really great. And we did continue to collect surveys from adults. So now we have over 50 surveys, and that starts to give us a little bit more statistical power to start actually understanding. But that also is another thing that we're going to keep doing so that we can keep understanding as attitudes change. And like I said, we did finish the 3 current monitoring program. It's almost 300,000 lines of data, and it took about 560 personnel hours and 3 individual personnel from SRL to get that data in the shape that it's in. And we're not done yet, like I said. I wanted to put this in here because this was not a small part of the project, but in the grand scheme of things and in the report, it's gonna look like a very small part of the project. But it took a lot of us working together and double checking because, right, we don't wanna mistakenly put some data in or something like that. So we were checking each other and making sure that that was correct because we understood the value it had to the project. So in the final report, that's what I've been working on the past couple of months. Basically, all of these individual elements are going to be gathered in one place. All of the content we've created specific to this project will be in that report, plus all of the results from the surveys and from the data that we've collected will be in that report, plus, recommendations, which you guys are sort of getting a highlight reel here right now. So for summary, these are the educational resources we've created, and we've had about 4,500 interactions with public in Burke County over the past 3 years. I think this is really great, and like I said, we've just compiled, there are a lot of resources available that just weren't accessible. They existed, but people didn't know about them, they didn't have the time to go find them. So all of this was in supplement of the stuff that already exists. Like I said, finishing water and soil, we did that yesterday, so that's great. The air monitoring station is monitored every 2 weeks through the end of July. So we established the air monitoring station in July of 2019, and that will run into 2020, and all of that data will also be incorporated in the final report. At this point, I want to really thank all the folks at DOE and SRNL who shared protocols with us to get this air monitoring station up and running. Folks, they came out, they built it. I had multiple phone numbers for data technicians or for technicians that I could call if something was wrong with the air monitoring station. Everybody was so helpful with getting that established, and they really saw the value in getting that established. And it's at the Burke County Environmental Management facility along River Road in Burke County, and Chief Sanders, who runs that facility, so it houses their fire trucks and some police officers. He's been really helpful in getting that established as well. And every time we go out there, the firemen wave and say hi and ask us what we're doing. But it's taken a lot of people to get that air monitoring station up and running, and I'm very thankful for all their help. So this slide's big because in the next couple of slides, as you can probably see, you all have the data there. I'm going to show you a couple of preliminary graphs of the data that we have. These are for educational purposes only. The data was never meant to be on the same graph together. So that's one of the reasons it's taken so long and been so hard, is because everybody does something a little bit different. And this is just to really illustrate that there's not any outliers, right? One group isn't getting back a super high number or a super low number compared to the other groups. And in that, some groups sample certain things. So for example, I'm going to show you the slide of milk, and Georgia Power doesn't have any numbers there. That doesn't mean Georgia Power doesn't test milk, they just don't test milk for strontium-89. So all of that will be explained in the report, but I wanted to at least show you kind of what we are going for with all of this data talk. So I'll put the first one up. We did test drinking water for tritium, but at the time that I made these slides, I didn't have any of SREL's data back, and I actually still don't have any of SREL's data back from the lab. The drinking water regulatory limit is 20,000 picocuries per liter. And you can see on this that Georgia Power tested the highest with just under 450, but these are 10-year averages. These aren't one data point in time. We felt that that would be, it shows a better picture to have the 10-year average than to have just like last year's data. So this is what it kind of looks like. And this was an example with all three. And in the report, SREL's value will be there too. And this is an example of SREL. We only had 2 samples back, which is why I think our average is a little different. But Georgia Power, they do test milk. I don't want this to look like they don't test milk. They do. They just don't test strontium-89. So this, I think, is a good point to say that like this is why the data is so confusing for the public. It's because there's different things that different groups test for, and it might not all be in the same place. And that's fine, that's how we've been doing it, but the goal was to get it at some point in the same place. So this is what we were able to come up with. So lessons learned. Like I said, the biggest lesson we have learned in this project is that you have to go to where the people are, whether it's school kids, whether it's showing up to the 4-H fair and having a booth. We went to a local 5K in Burke County, and we set up a booth at the 5K because environmental monitoring programs are about protecting your health. We had to get creative, and thankfully Natalie and Janie were so creative in figuring out and helping me brainstorm, like, where can we go next? Where are there going to be people? Who can I talk to next? I think the community talks it's a good thing to have there, right? Like, it was good for me to show up and be available to ask and answer question, not ask, but answer question for folks. But, you know, a busy mom of 3 can't necessarily make a 6 p.m. meeting, and then she probably works 40 hours a week, so she probably couldn't make one during the day. So adding variety in where you can talk to people is going to be any organization's best bet. So our general lessons from the project, social media did help us a lot, whether it was advertising for a project. Natalie would use her personal Facebook to go live while I was giving a talk. And so we could reach an additional 30 or 40 people that couldn't make it physically to the event, but knew Natalie, they trusted her, and she would put this on her Facebook and they would see that too. And we would put stuff on the SREL Facebook page as well, and that would, you know, reach more people that couldn't physically make it to the facility. Resources are scattered. There are lots of resources available that lots of educated, well-meaning folks have put together, but sometimes on a web page they're 5 clicks deep or they're 4 clicks deep. And honestly, if it wasn't my job, I probably wouldn't have clicked 4 or 5 times to get to that web page. It's just not how people work. So I think long term, we need to be more creative, think more deeply about where these resources are housed, how they're housed, and how we can make them more accessible, not just in putting them on a web page, but making them like really and truly available to folks. And that children are future adults. So I say that because one of the hardest things about the project is the adults are the ones who had concerns, but the adults are the ones that couldn't get to come to places because they were busy and they had lives. But children are in school and they're there. They're going to be there no matter what. And so if you can get in there and talk to a 3rd grade classroom and a 7th grade classroom and a high school classroom, and they see you over and over, that starts to build knowledge, right? That builds generational knowledge. And so when those children become adults and participating in society, they're going to have at least some background knowledge of radiation, of environmental monitoring programs. And so when I say children are future adults, like of course they are, but that knowledge that they have in school builds with them as they become adults. So our next steps, we're going to continue Burke County Ecology Day at Blakeney Elementary School. We're hoping to make some additional changes to get the primary school involved this year, but we're still working out those details. And this is 4th graders. I made a mistake, it's 5th graders. We sort of fell through, there was a staffing change at the middle school, but we're working with the 5th graders at Blakeney now with the same project, doing the same things. And we're going to be summarizing this project. That's sort of our next steps. My next step is finishing a report, but then I'm leaving SREL at the end of the year. And so my replacement, Holly DeVault, that's her information right there. Excuse me, she's the one that's continuing the education in Burke County with the schools. She's the one that's going to be taking this project on the next steps. So, and Natalie is still here with us as well, and Janie's still working with Georgia One. So the core group of folks will still be around, still be working in Burke County. We're not stopping. And before I answer questions, I really do want to thank all the folks that have helped Remob, who've helped me, who've helped us get data, who've helped me answer questions, who, I've been able to email, and they don't have to answer my emails, but they do, and I really appreciate that. So thank you. There's so many people from, EPA, like Rob Pope and Deidre, to DOE and South Carolina DHEC. I mean, they came across the river to Georgia to answer questions to Georgia residents, and they didn't have to do that. The folks at Plant Vogel, they've been super supportive. They totally agree that a more educated public about radiation and nuclear is better. So there have been so many people behind the scenes. It's not just me. Even though it feels like me in that stadium that's empty, there's lots of people around me that have been so helpful and generous with their time and their knowledge and their education, and I really appreciate that.
All right. Doug, let's start with you.
Doug Howard Cab. Megan, great presentation. Just have two questions for you.
Yeah.
The recent survey that you said you sent out to the Burke County folks, what were some of the questions that were asked on that survey?
So our goal for the survey was to understand what basically our baseline was. So we asked questions like, can you define radiation, yes or no? So it was more simple yes or no questions, because if someone would say no to that, if we get 100 surveys and 80% of the people say they don't know what radiation is, we know to start with defining radiation. So those were the kind of questions we were asking on that.
The audience that was
Yes. And we only were sampling adults, and how we did that procedure, it's UGA approved. It gets approved just like an animal experiment would. Any survey with humans has to be approved for ethical reasons. If we approached an adult and said, "Hi, would you like to take a survey?" and they said no, we just had to turn, it was only folks who were willing to participate and answer questions. And we did have a lot of folks read the first question and be like, "I don't feel comfortable answering anything about nuclear energy." So we would just take it back and throw that, even if they got down 4 questions, we just have to throw the response away.
And final question. It didn't seem like you worked with the high school kids that much. Was there a reason why?
So in the very beginning of the project, when I reached out to all the schools, the middle school was the first one to get back to me. I did, I think, maybe 1 or 2 talks in the high school, but because the middle school answered so quickly and because of the load of everything else, I chose to go with 1 school for now. So now we'll have a middle school curriculum that we've already worked out, and Holly is really working on the sort of 3rd, 4th, 5th grade curriculum that she's working on. So eventually, I think high school is a great place, right? Because you can start doing chemistry experiments. You can do fun things with elements and radiation that is perfectly suited to high school. So it just didn't work out for this project, but I think that's a growth potential.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Candace, I believe yours was up next.
Candace Cave Cab. Thanks, Megan. It was a really great presentation. I know community education and outreach can be tough. I had a few questions. I was just thinking about sustainability and trying to figure out, was there an initial start and end date for this project? And what are your steps what are you thinking about sustainability?
So the initial project was only supposed to last 2 years. So it was technically supposed to end in 2018, but for lots of reasons, we continued that on. And we are, just like sort of this year in 2019, we wanted to continue the most successful parts of the program. Holly is still working in the schools. She is keeping Burke County Ecology Day. So those are what we're maintaining from this project that was created within the bounds of it.
Okay, and my last question was, as it relates to surveying, did you survey the teens or the teachers that were receiving your program at the schools at all? And how did you use that survey information if you did?
So like I said, our surveys go through UGA's guidelines. We are not specially trained to survey children under 18 years old, so all of the surveys are from adults. But we did survey the teachers at Blakeney who consented, and I haven't analyzed any of the survey data yet. That's sort of a little bit out of my wheelhouse for data analysis, so I'm learning how to analyze that data right now. But that will be in the final report.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Okay. Eleanor, yours was next.
Eleanor Hobson Cab. Hi, Megan. Thank you for your great work for the past 3 years. It did sound very bleak for a while, but in 2019, you started coming through.
Yeah.
And your results are probably paying off now. However, my question is, how can you continue the education there and continue to get the cooperation that you were able to get within the past year? I'm thinking you got the schools, which was a good choice. How about the churches?
Yeah.
That's a Bible belt.
It is.
Okay.
So Natalie and Janie were really great points of contact to speak with churches. I did give a few talks to Bible schools over the summer. So one luckily tool in my toolbox that I have is I have all of SREL's education and outreach animals. So I can go to a Bible study and bring a snake and bring an alligator and sort of get the kids' attention and then talk about contaminant pathways using the animal as a guide and talk about how animals breathe in, they eat food just like us. And so I was able to, I did go to probably a handful of Bible schools, vacation Bible schools,
Yes.
that's the word I was looking for. And I think that is a really great outlet. One thing we tried, Janie, Natalie, and I tried to get traction on and never just really got the traction was to maybe go to the adult versions of that within churches. And that never really happened. But I think, the draw of the animals gets everybody. That's another thing we learned. So we did do a few churches, but yeah, you're exactly right. There's a huge community of churches in that area. And it would be great to tap into that resource in the future.
Again, Eleanor Hobson Cab, good job.
Thank you.
Continue your work, and I know you're leaving, but I hope that those who follow will pick up where you left off.
That is our intention.
It is needed badly, and there are so many elderly and challenged citizens there.
Yes.
Maybe a mobile unit would help as well.
Yeah, one place I did go is the retiree community center. In Burke County, it's a community center, but it's primarily elderly folks that go and they play bingo and they do that sort of stuff. So I gave maybe 3 talks to that group over the course of actually just this year. They were sort of hidden away in the bag, and I couldn't, it's just Natalie was the person who found that contact, and I was able to go there a few times and talk to them. So I think you're on the right track, and we're not going to stop.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you, Megan, for your presentation. You touched on some of this, but what was the driver for the pick of Burke County and only Burke County? Was it Plant Vogel, or was it just a case of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or?
No, it was actually CAB. I didn't go into details, but there were some citizens from Burke County that were coming and giving public comment, and CAB wrote a recommendation. I can't remember the number, but a recommendation for SREL to do a review of the monitoring programs and determine if the monitoring programs and what they were monitoring at this time would effectively protect the surrounding area, so including Burke County. So SREL scientists did that review, gave it back to DOE, who gave it to CAB, and one of the things in that report that SREL created was it said that these environmental monitoring programs they are sampling things so that we understand what's in the environment to protect human health, but they're not very accessible. People don't understand them. They're very dense with scientific language. And so when that got back to CAB, I think it was CAB recommendation 317 that recommended an education program to start in Burke County. So that's how we got here.
Thank you. And I know you said you've been in some other, I know you said you've been in Aiken County and some other counties. Is this project intended to be a pilot? Will you formalize a program for other counties as well?
I'm not sure. That is more for Dr. Rhodes, the director of SREL, to decide once I get this report written. The content is created, like I said. There's a good jumping point now to move it outside of the Burke County area and to the other counties that touch SRS.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Greg?
Thanks, Megan. Greg Murray, CAB. I have all kinds of thoughts about this. I did want to ask you a question. This is going to sound like an unfriendly question, but it's really not. Why does the public need to be educated about radiation and nuclear issues?
I think that the public needs to be educated about these issues because it's everybody's environment, right? And the contaminants and the byproducts, because of the monitoring programs, we know that by the time they reach site boundary, they're below levels. But it is an environment we all live in, and it is a scary thing, right? So if you don't understand something, you're afraid of it. And so if we can use these monitoring programs to help people understand and have broader knowledge about what's going on, they can ask smarter questions, right? It's just more giving people the tools to understand their community and what's around them, so that they can make educated decisions based on their lives and what they want to do with it and how they want to advocate for a community that they want to live in.
Do you have, Greg Murray again, do you have some evidence that the communities are afraid or fearful of what's going on at the site?
This is only my personal experience talking and interacting with folks specifically in Burke County, but yes, I had people who, like I said, they would start reading the questions of the survey and say, I don't want to lose my job and appear anti-nuclear. I don't want to engage with you because they felt like I might have specific interests related to nuclear and was trying to sway them. I had folks come up and tell me that the fish that they've been eating for years and years and years are changing, and why are they changing? And right, the easy answer is it's all the radiation. But in one of my community talks, I looked up how many permits were available, non-nuclear permits were available for the Savannah River, and in Augusta alone, there are over 450 dumping permits into the Savannah. And that is heavy metals and other things that can affect our health, but right, the easy answer is it's all the radiation. And so people, they just don't know. And I personally feel like it's important for them to know, to be able to either know where they can go and ask questions, which is why I kept those community talks where people could just come ask me questions, or where to go to find the answers. I mean, I talked to fishermen who've been fishing for 30 years, and they had no idea there were consumption guidelines for fish, for mercury in the Savannah River. And that just kind of blew my mind a little bit. So sharing, just getting out resources and sharing it and making sure people know, just like, healthcare or insurance purposes, you want people to know that there's help available or information available, and this was part of that.
I think a stakeholder survey regarding some of these issues would be invaluable in this regard.
Yeah, so that survey was kind of the original goal when we thought we were going to have lots of attendance and lots of people coming was that. And we sort of had to switch the goals of the survey to just start understanding, like, what do you know and what do you not know? But yeah, that's sort of a pilot survey. And I know Gene wants to expand that.
Oh, I'm sorry, because I share some of this sentiment. There's some board members who believe this, and I actually believe this to a degree, that people aren't terribly interested in these issues. And that's one of the things that I think is important for us to understand. And it may be or it may not be, but I think we should have an understanding of whether they are or not. So I'll stop. I could go on for a long time. I'd love to talk to you about some of your data and the things you do with it and some of the way your programs are working. I would argue, even though you don't have a lot of people coming to your thing, there's a lot of virtue just to advertising that you're doing it. Because that way, if people complain about what's going on, you said, well, you had opportunities to come talk to us about this and you didn't do it. So I think there's a lot of virtue to that, even if you don't end up having a lot of people participating. So I don't want to dominate any more time, but thank you for your conversation.
All right. Let's come over here to AK, who's been super patient.
A.K. Hassan Cab. Thank you, Megan, for your presentation. I'd like to respectfully make a suggestion. And you are probably already familiar with it, but perhaps have not thought about it in this instance. You mentioned that you was able to do research and identify significant information relevant to what you want, but that information was like 5 pages deep, et cetera, and others without the patience that you have or the time commitment would not have achieved that. As you perhaps already know, now that you've identified those pages, if you, your replacement, could get a team of people, 2 or 3 people, to access those pages that you found useful frequently for a short period of time, those search engines, as you know, are designed to make information easily accessible. So over a very short period of time, probably within 30 days, those pages would move from 4 or 5 pages deep to 1 to 2 pages.
Yeah.
So that's just something to throw out there that you might want to put into play.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. One of my, I'm one person, I don't have the skills to make a web page, but one of my pie in the sky ideas was to just create a page where it's all on the front page. But that would require, getting permissions from all the different groups and organizations that have created those and that kind of thing. But yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
All right. Malcolm.
Malcolm Phillips Cab. It was a delightful presentation, and I appreciate you doing this. You're very articulate, and you prepared it well and organized it well. My question trying to focus on success. You said a couple of times this was very successful, and my question is, how did you define success? And 1, and 2, more importantly, or as importantly, how did you measure success? And success can't simply be in the number of people that come. Success has to be in providing information that the person retains that then changes their views, or at least they retain the information. How did you measure that? Or was that your definition of success to start with? And B, how did you measure it?
So you really touched on one of the hardest things in education outreach for anybody to measure. We can, count the number of brochures we hand out, but we can't answer if that person reads them. I can count the number of people that I interact with, but as far as them retaining information, we don't really know. So for us, we defined specific goals internally for our project. So getting the sampling done, getting the air monitoring station established, hosting 3 community talks in this certain time period. And so that was the way we had to define success for us, was making sure we were creating the content, that we were performing the duties of the project, and talking to people. So that's why when I count totals, I include not just the number of people we reached, but we held this many talks, we did this many presentations, because that, like you mentioned, is one of the hardest things to do in outreach, is what is how impactful is it? So our internal guides of success and defining success for the project were more goal-driven, and it has to be a long-term survey, a long-term study to really figure out what was the true impact of hosting this project.
And Malcolm Phillips again, Cab. I assume then that you call it a baseline survey. It appeared your baseline survey really started in year 2, not year 1, so it wasn't a really true baseline survey. Is that?
So in year 1, we tried our idea, right, when we were making the assumption we were going to be interacting with a lot of people, was to do a before and after survey. So we started a survey in year 1 with the guide to compare it to our results in year 3. Yeah. And because I think we maybe had 2 people fill out that survey, it just didn't work. So it was a great point, and maybe this survey can be the baseline for 5 or 10 years from now when Holly and SREL continue this type of work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, let's come back to you.
Megan, you had a couple slides, one titled Drinking Water and one Milk. They were charts. And I think you said that they were, what you displayed were averages. I'm just wondering, are any of the individual tests that you did they exceed the acceptable limits?
That is a question for the individual monitoring program. Off the top of my head, I have every individual data point in that data set, but that was not what I was creating that for. And I guess I made the assumption that the data's already been out for, some of the data's almost been out for 10 years, that if there were individual samples above detectable limits, that would have already been out and determined in the public. So I personally can't answer, that question, but these are the 10-year. I would assume off the 10-year average that, they're very low 10-year averages. So if there was an outlier or something, that would be a question for the monitoring groups for sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Malcolm?
Just one quick question. I was going to ask the same question, good question on the peaks. You mentioned the regulatory limit for the tritium in drinking water, but you didn't mention the regulatory limit for strontium in milk picocuries per liter. Do you happen to have that?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Okay.
The tritium one is just like a one that, because tritium is a primary contaminant of concern, that's one that I talk to people a lot about, so I had that on the top of my head.
Thank you.
Craig?
Hi, Megan. It's Craig Van Trees with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Just wanted to say a very great presentation, and thank you for recognizing Rob Pope and Deidre Lloyd. I'll pass it along to them. I just wanted to ask if you have utilized, or your group has utilized, our community involvement coordinator. We have a group that's been dedicated to Savannah River for decades.
Yeah, so I'm not in contact with them personally right now. I was in contact with, I think, was that Rob at the time in 2016, 2017?
It was probably Kyle Bryant.
Okay.
They've now been absorbed by public affairs, but as you pass the torch, please reach out to us, because we do have a group that could help you or assist you that may have already done survey work in the past.
Yeah, I really did, maybe a plug for the EPA, but the community involvement training that they held in Kansas City in 2018, I went to that, and it was great. I learned a lot, and I got to interact with a lot of people who do similar work to me, and that was super helpful. So I hope they hold that again for everyone.
Yeah, and please reach out to us, because we do offer that training periodically, so
Awesome.
it's there to help you.
I'll make sure Holly gets that info.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Megan.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, folks, we got about a minute left for lunch. You want to do anything, or you just want to go? Let's just go. Let's come back at 12:30, everybody.
Dance party.